eradicator of dead wood. Huh. I was expecting you. Come closer. Come on, sit down by the fire. The spirit of this forest is like a phoenix. It needs a cycle of fire to be renewed. But when people who don't know how to talk to the spirit try to control the forest, the fire that comes destroys instead of renews. Fire can strip an ecosystem of its chemical nutrient reserves, but while much of it is lost, the nutrients that remain are made more available to plants, fungi, and microbes. Fertility can increase after a low-intensity fire. It can break chemical bonds in plant matter where nutrients were locked up and dissolve them into bioavailable compounds like ammonia and nitrates. Really, the major factor determining nutrient composition and thus ecosystem health is the intensity of the fire. What positive effects a fire can bring to a landscape diminish as a fire burns hotter and longer, as with our climate change-fueled massive wildfires. Plants need 6 major nutrients. The first 3 are nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. But calcium, magnesium, and sulfur are also important. Calcium, magnesium, and potassium are group 1 and 2 elements, and nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur are in groups 15 and 16. Keep this split in mind. Nutrients can be lost by ash transport, leaching, and erosion, but oxidation and volatilization are the largest and most immediate causes. Depending on intensity, potassium, magnesium, and calcium ions can either increase or remain the same in post-fire soils, but nitrogen and sulfur levels, they usually decrease. Nitrogen is volatilized at 200 degrees Celsius, but calcium is volatilized at 1240 degrees Celsius because each element volatilizes at a different temperature. Fire intensity affects nutrient ratios in post-fire environments for this reason. Under certain conditions, low-intensity fires have been shown to increase agricultural productivity, where high-intensity fires can decrease it. High-intensity fire also depletes nutrients deeper down in the soil as well. A prescribed fire is a land management practice of consciously burning parts of the landscape to both return nutrients to the soil and prevent intense wildfire. Prescribed fires in forests where only understory vegetation was burnt saw no decrease in soil nutrients. After repeated prescription fires, there was a slight decrease of calcium, no change to phosphorus, magnesium, or potassium levels, and a slight decrease of nitrogen and sulfur. Even so, nitrogen increased in deeper soil, reducing fuel and increasing bioavailability. As an aggregate of materials, both organic and inorganic, the structure and composition of soil can have far-reaching effects on plant communities and landforms. After a fire, raindrops percussing on the bare soil can bring smaller clay particles to the surface and push larger silt and sand particles below. This causes a clay crust to form, and when it dries, it is called hard pan, and it can be impermeable to both seedlings and future rain events. At 400 degrees Celsius, clay particles can fuse into sand. This makes the soil coarser, less self-adhering, less porous, less absorbent, and more compactable, making erosion more likely. Charcoal can mitigate some of the soil texture issues by absorbing nitrogen and retaining water. It also binds and deactivates phenolic compounds, promoting fern and moss growth. Particles of charcoal with sand can work to act like clay. Humus is a mix of decomposing matter that makes up the organic component of soil. When heated, humus's carbohydrates and proteins break down into aromatic compounds, some of which are hydrophobic. Hydrophobic compounds can lower water infiltration and water storage times. Soil microbes are critical to the health of the soil. They break down organic matter so that it is available to plants. They can bind heavy metals and other harmful compounds, and they maintain the soil's homeostasis. Low-intensity fires have little effect on microbial population. Actually, it can increase the metabolic activity of the remaining population, whereas high-intensity fires can completely sterilize the top layer of soil. Fertility is very negatively impacted by the disruption of microbial communities. Increased microbial activity after a fire helps retain nutrients and is aided by the availability of calcium. Higher pH, conversion of nutrients to soluble forms, higher temperature, and less competition for water. The plants that died in the fire leave behind roots which rot and provide additional food. I hope now you can understand the difference between a fire they can create and a fire they can destroy. I hope you will use this information because your life and the life of everyone you know depends on understanding how to live in a world without abusing it.